Welcome everyone. My name is Murat Güvenç. I'll be moderating this session. We will have three speakers. Dr. Özge Aktaş from TESEV, Turkish Economic and Social Studies Foundation, General Director. Miss Özlem, Dr. Miss Özlem Altınkaya, she will be joining us through Skype. And next to me, I have my colleague, Barış Salihoğlu. He is from the Middle East Technical University. I forgot your academic title, Associate Professor. Okay, thank you very much. Today we will be talking about data. As you can see, we have a lot of demand in the room, many participants with us. So this is about also the subject matter of my presentation, because data is not taken into account very seriously these days, but I will be talking about the dimensions of it, the dimensions that we should take into account. I'll talk about the historical development of it and also some problems we have been encountering about data in our day. Well, let me say we have three speakers. We will leave the floor to Miss Mazman, and then to Miss Altınkaya, and then to Mr. Salihoğlu. Özge's presentation, Miss Mazman presentation will be rather about the governance process in municipalities and the management of data and what kind of solutions we can come up with for those problems. And in Özlem Altınkaya's presentation, we will be hearing about the collecting process of information and the data technologies. What do they offer us? What kind of new concepts and representation styles can be of discussion? And Barış Salihoğlu, I can say, will talk about the physical environment and share some observations about the Marmara Sea, and the data related with the subject. Actually, I was expecting to see a higher number of people in the room, and I wrote some introductory remarks. I was going to say if we held this meeting 25 years ago, for example, there wouldn't have been much of an interest as compared to our day, because in 70s, data wasn't that much of a discussion point. In English, they say data are. So it wasn't considered to be an area of problem back in time. Methodological, philosophical, and epistemological reasons are lying behind that, but basically I can say with the domination of positivist approaches, the data itself isn't that much considered, wasn't actually that much considered to be a prerequisite of scientific studies. But what was important was the question of research and a testing tool, methodology, and then to test that data was taken at hand as only materials to prove that or to test. So it itself wasn't considered to be a problem. I mean the data. But in our day, we can't have the same approach, because the data production system and their conventions, their definitions, the data definitions aren't clear anymore, and we are not that much sure about them anymore. Labeling them, evaluating them, watching them, observing them is not as reliable in our day as compared to the past. In our day, the cities, districts, metropolitan areas, metropolitan regions, provinces, urban regions are some of the terms we utilize today, but we don't know exactly to what they correspond in our day. The former old categories fall short to represent the concepts of our day, and we know that. But the concepts of the past, uh, when they start to fall short, uh, there is also some need of discussion how we can come up with the new ones, but we are not that much sure of it anyways. For example, we have this term called the urban region. It's neither like a city nor like a village, but we don't know where to draw the boundaries for that, and we don't have concrete uh, references for such a definition. That's why the spatial concepts, their restrictions, their limitations, their measuring is very much problematic in our day. So, with a very short summary, if you will, I will try to uh, talk about this social spatial formation concept and how it has come to be and how it has been shaped in Turkey. As you know, in 1960s, cities started to grow incrementally. So in the peripheries and also within the centers of the cities, an intensification started. And this intensification in city-related studies are highlighted. And instead of urban explosion, some used urban implosion. So the explosion of cities inwards. And there were some peripheries that the municipalities could not inspect or audit. And there we had many small district municipalities, and these were autonomously making decisions in their own regions, independent of the central municipality, which led to a problem. And in the 1980 military coup that took place in Turkey, one of the first things done was to revoke the authorities of those small district municipalities that were located in the peripheries of the cities. And then a local administration system came in use, so the administrative borders of the cities were redefined, and new city municipalities and district municipalities started, and a two-stage governance method took start. Of course, there were many discussions about their authorities, and these discussions also were heard at courts. And in Turkey, there were discussions, and some said that we call the region which is 20 kilometers off the city center a periphery or a district, but this was defined. The district borders, Istanbul, Tekirdağ, like cities, starting from these new sizes actually were determined, and this was discussed within the scope of a law, an act which was passed, and it was called the Act of Pair of Compasses. The old definitions, old categories then lost their meanings, and new units started to emerge. And in Istanbul, in Izmir, like provinces, we cannot exactly tell what we mean when we use the word village, because now all the villages are registered as neighborhoods, and they do not look like the neighborhoods of cities, but they are more looking like village-like or rural-like area neighborhoods. But when we look at the world, this was not specific to the world because the global urbanization started to take place. It was like the removal or abolishing of the rural areas off of the faces of cities. So on really the Febrin talks about the social transformations, social practices, representation tools are the issues he included in to his model. So the practices, conceptual frameworks, and tools. And he uses the word moment, a historic moment for the model he defines. So the moment is a moment in history, but it's also like the moment in physics, like unity with tension. The concept's boundaries started to become more and more blurry, and we don't have a comprehensive and also clear definition for that. It is not possible to go back in history and draw the lines from there because the old categories have now disappeared and we need new boundaries. But for our day, we then need data, information about how to draw these lines. And we know where that information will come. Secondly, we know that this information cannot be collected with the singular efforts of scientists because it requires collecting the data, the information of the whole country. And thirdly, we have the technologies to do so. What's only necessary is to come up with an institutional structure to prepare and offer that information, that data. In 1920s, for example, the National Statistics Institutes convened and they talked about the concepts of statistics, national statistics. In 1920s, so the Institutes of Statistics convened and they established the International Statistics Institutes, and these are about the professions, sectors, and also some other source of classifications. They came up in 1920s about the classifications or the main concepts because in 1920s things were not like it was way back in the past. So it is similar to our day. That's why we have to come up with new categories. How is it going to be possible? The categories should have a high spatial resolution. So we need data which is as accurate or as detailed as pixels. And the concepts, the definitions, the social categories to be defined should be very detailed. For example, the manufacturing industry or the service sector or arts, like concepts, phenomena in our day aren't that much detailed in our day, and it is even insufficient in terms of data. So from manufacturing of shoes to manufacturing of ship equipment to the new professions we haven't heard before. We need new approaches for those, and to do that, we need two methods. In that conceptualization, the cognitive psychologists say that we need a classification system which will function in two stages. One is to use in daily life, For example, all the objects we see around us can be given as examples. This is object-based representation. This is called object-based representation. And these objects are defined with their boundaries. So this bottle, for example, is defined by its borders. And the second stage goes one step further. And in architecture, for example, there's this term called the site plan. And here there's also the border or boundary related definition. But when you go one step further, you will see the city and also region. And then if you go one step further, you will see countries. So the definitions done over boundaries at that moment fall short. Why is that? Well, let me give you an example from the place we are. The district we call is Harbiye, but where does it end? And where does Nişantaşı, the district next to it, starts? People who call this place Harbiye may call them Harbiye. But when we want to draw some borders in between the two districts next to one another, we will have problems, and the object-based representations will lose their basis. But in our daily lives, of course, we need both those object-based representations and also some site-oriented representation tools when we're talking about greater areas. And technically speaking, we are close to solving into that problem, because if we have data information at hand, we can solve such problems. And Özge will be talking about how this is possible to be done street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, and talk about some studies about the Turkish Economic and Social Studies Foundation. And our other speaker will be talking about regional representations, how the regional representations can be possible. Our speaker who will join us through Skype. And our friend from Middle East Technical University will talk about how much more sensitive the data has become in our day. So without further ado, I would like to finalize my introductory remarks and leave the floor to Ms. Mazman. Thank you very much, Professor. Can we have my PowerPoint presentation on? Well, with Professor Güvenç, we started working 10 years ago during my academic studies, and we were struggling with data back then. And now I am working at a think tank. So we study again together, but the data we used to use to understand the social geography is now utilized how to see or to understand in urban policies. The urban region is an interesting term, but in terms of its policies or governance or administration, there's not a concrete party to speak to. That's why we are trying to come up with data-oriented city policies and also where the boundaries start and where they end. And I will mostly concentrate on Istanbul. So I'll talk about why these policies are important, why we are engaged in such city policies, I mean database city policies, and why do we allocate our time for that at an NGO, at a think tank. And then I'll talk about data itself, the ecosystem of data. It's coming in quotations, as you can see in the screen, on the screen, because the data ecosystem isn't also fully understood, but it covers the issues such as the sharing or the production or the generation of data. It has its own habitat, but what factors are used to define that? And thirdly, I'll talk about some handicaps, some problems we come across and how we can overcome and tackle those problems. And fourthly, I'll talk about what we have done. So some examples at the end. The data-based city policies, why are they important? Well, first of all, the decision makers and the city policy makers at local administrations need to come up with the right strategies, and data based policies, city policies, are important for that. We in our daily lives see that not that much of an importance is attached to that subject. It's maybe because there's a lack of high quality data, or the available data isn't being used. So when strategies are set, the data at hand are not fully used, or they are used only in a limited fashion. And the municipalities are, yes, coming up with strategies, and in our day, for example, in this current period, they are offering it to the city, to the municipality assemblies, but we see that the data-based policies are not that much practiced. So it's important to question how we can define the performance setting in line with these strategies, and how to use the data-based city policies. And secondly, I'm talking about the local administrations, by the way. Other than identifying the strategies, it's also important to identify the spatial distribution. That's where the spatial data come in use. And another process is related with monitoring and implementing the strategies when those strategies are offered, are proposed. So in that stage, we will need, of course, the performance indicators. And these performance indicators also should be created on a data-based orientation. That's why it's important to see where those strategies and data will take us. That's why usage of data and producing city policies based on data will help ones consider where they are headed towards, and also self-evaluate. And the last item here is about transparency and accountability. Municipalities publish such documents. Maybe many of you know this is a random document by Beşiktaş municipality. It's an image showing the performance scale from 2019. Here it is stated what the main target, what the main strategic target is. It says increasing the life quality standards, and also to effectively run social aid and services. And there are some sub targets, goals for that. For example, in 2.1, it says that disseminating or some events or trainings or activities towards children, women, the old, the senior, and those in need. And then in 2.1.5, for example, they say more specifically that there will be some kindergarten services. And there are some targets, figurative targets, for example, for 2017, 18, 19, the number of the kindergartens, but it's also about certain other factors. Is it defined according to the number of people who cannot afford some kindergartens, or the number of the children living in that region or district? So certain statistical data is used, should be used in such plannings, and the usage of data is very important. And these are, by the way, all open public information. They're available at the websites, and we see as the citizens, for example, if they hit their targets in 2018 by constructing 320 kindergartens. So we can see it, but there's also the question, is this scenario or is that plan a healthy one? Was it achieved? Were the targets achieved? And how much of it was implemented? And the second thing, as I said before, was about the ecosystem of data, and Mr. Professor talked about it, the statistics programs and institutes. For example, the Statistics Institute of Turkey every 5 years publish a program defining the roles and responsibilities of other relevant institutions, and they collect the statistical information and also some administrative records, for example, by the Higher Education Board or the Ministry of Health, and accordingly produce data and share. We have worked with the Statistics Institute of Turkey very closely recently, and I have to come to know that they also personally knew me. But then we figured out that they weren't receiving much data, and there was much demand for the data they had at hand. So very few people or parties do really ask for the statistical pieces of information from the Statistics Institute of Turkey. But there's much to do, for example, about the quality of lifestyle. We don't have a system that ensures that gives the spatial data. And generally we use the address-based systems for also such statistics, and we still have a few data. Yes, they're being improved, but there's much more way to go. And these also are related with the population census, and also the same thing is about the migration. I have talked to almost all the institutions that keep the data about migration. I only asked them about the variables they were using. I didn't ask for the specific statistics, but it was such a rough patch. There were some institutions, I have to say, were very reluctant to share their data, the variables at hand. It was difficult to understand the reason for that, but maybe it was about some intra-institutional legislations hindering them from sharing. And also the third issue about the ecosystem is related with processing and sharing the data collected and the infrastructure need for that. For example, about migration or the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Education, related issues can be very easily shared, and through those infrastructures we can really share those easily, and from that on we can start the multi-stakeholder processes, and these will all have an impact on the system at large. And what can we do for the optimization of all these processes and also improvement of the ecosystem? Well, we can come up with national and institutional data policies and also legislations and regulations. And the second thing is about the usability of the data. We, as I said before, have a lot of data actually in Turkey, but we come up with some problems in the usage or utilization of those pieces of data. And the last thing is about data collection, processing, and sharing processes being more productive and efficient among the institutions. So interinstitutional approach is what we need. There was this study, some of you maybe know that study. It is called Istanbul 95. It refers to 95 by 95 centimeters. So it's about a healthy child and that child's height by the age of 3. This was defined by the World Health Organization, and with the support of Bernard van Leer Foundation, this project was initiated. And what we highlight here is to see how we overcame some problems with a multi-stakeholder approach. This goes the same for data collection and all the other relevant processes. So we had some parties involved there, such as TESEV. So we have universities and the NGOs, and also Marmara Municipalities Union was a partner to it with a protocol, and we had 4 Istanbul district municipalities. So it was a common project by the public institutions and also some private foundations and NGOs. And the project was aiming at increasing the life qualities of children living in cities. So we have decided to take the decision-making process into account more, and also neighborhood-oriented data collection, and also target-oriented usage of the data to facilitate the coordination process.
That's how we started. As for Istanbul 95, we thought we had to see the differentiation of the different towns, and we had to acquire the data of the neighborhoods. We know that we have limited data when it comes to neighborhoods. However, as noted by the professor, Turkish Statistical Institution had some data on the children's population in the neighborhoods, and we were able to acquire all this information. We do not get the data from the system. First, we have to make a recourse to get this data, and we also needed some criteria which would show us the income level of these children and their families, and it was not that easy to find the data. We had to come up with a different variable, and it had to do with the cost of the rents. Probably you all know about it. It was quite a problematic issue, people said. We acquired all this data on the current market value of the apartments. At least we could have a variable that could show us the income level of the families. This is what I meant by the fact that there is no data. Well, it's available, but it's not that easy to access the data. Moreover, by working hand in hand with the municipalities, we came up with an inventory of the things that the municipalities could take care of. We worked hand in hand with the municipalities, and we created a digital interactive platform accordingly. And through this platform, I'm going to show you a couple of slides. With regard to this platform, there's this belediye.istanbul95.org. It's a map displaying the Istanbul, and there are also maps which do display the differentiation of different neighborhoods based on the age and income. Blue color shows you the regions with low level of income, and there is also this town, Beyoğlu, which we looked into. In Beyoğlu, you can see the relationship between different neighborhoods. So which neighborhoods are wealthy, which are poor, based on the children's population. For instance, if it's dark blue, then it means that the level of income is low and there are many children living there. The population of children is high. And you can also see the facilities offered by the municipalities, including the number of the teachers serving for these nurseries. So we have created a tool which would help the decision makers make better decisions. So we have accumulated different data, we have analyzed them. Maybe you can use this data as a tool of digital politics, and people highly adopted that. The municipalities took ownership of it, and they decided to go for such projects in Izmir and Gaziantep. The projects are still ongoing. In my short presentation, what what I've tried to tell you is that both in academia, civil society, and the public in general, sometimes we might feel like, well, we have enough data, we have 10 nurseries, what would happen if we know where they are? But once you visualize the data, then things might change and the perception around this data might change. That is why I believe it is highly important to have such visual tools in place. We will hold such projects in the upcoming future as well. I kindly ask you to have a look into this map. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. Can we get connected to Özlem? Is it possible?
Of the urban network in the Marmara region. And in doing so, I wanted to test the relevancy of the contemporary regional theories. The contemporary discussions on urban networks and regions either focused on polycentric case studies such as Randstad or Ruhr, or on case studies in which the largest city in the region, such as London or Paris, dominated the urban network. Complex scale and scope of the contemporary urbanization. However, the relevancy of these generalizations, I argue, should be re-evaluated. And my initial research questions in this study were as follows. To what extent can we identify a distinct, integrated, inter-regional urban network in the Marmara region? And where are the overlaps and differences between the dynamics of this urban network and the general models discussed in the literature? And for those of you who are not familiar with the area, I will begin with a brief introduction of the Marmara region. Turkey is divided into 7 geographical regions, and these regions have never been referred to as administrative units. The Marmara region comprises 11 provinces and covers a total area of 67,000 square kilometers. The total population of the Marmara region is more than 25 million, which is almost equal to 1/3 of Turkey's population, and it is the most populated, densest, and the most industrialized region of Turkey. This density is, of course, triggered by the existence of the imploding city, so to speak, Istanbul, which has a population of 14 million. But despite this large population, Istanbul is one of the smallest provinces in Turkey, clearly delineated by 2 water bodies in the north and south, and it is therefore subject to an immense and at the turn of the 21st century, the region has been a core focus of fundamental policy developments and infrastructural investments. And the majority of the mega infrastructural projects were situated within the provincial area of Istanbul. But on the other hand, these interventions also included interregional interventions, such as the İzmit Bay Bridge that connects to the Izmir-Istanbul highway, and the Istanbul-Ankara high-speed train that decreases the travel time between Istanbul and Ankara. The third bridge, highway, the third airport, and the Canal Istanbul projects are the most controversial interventions, as they specifically aim to generate land speculation within Istanbul. And these projects occupy the freshwater and forest areas of the city, encouraging urbanization on these landscapes. And massive urbanization pressure, the hinterland of Istanbul is a still beautiful countryside encompassing traditional activities such as agricultural production and animal husbandry. Also the Marmara region, therefore, hosts a diverse set of land uses, including very vulnerable geographic basins such as Kaz Mountains, that became sort of the hot debate due to the massive in the area. And in 2000, policy shifts triggered by Turkey's EU accession and a significant increase in urban infrastructure investment has seen the country enter a new era of regional urbanization under globalization. And these efforts prompted a novel set of regional policies. So I'm three of them. Law number 4720, which adopted the EU's three-level NOTS model, followed by Law 5449, which enabled the gradual establishment of regional development agencies known as RDAs in 2006, and these units were based on NUTS 2-level regions. And law number 6360, which is also referred to as the Metropolitan Municipality Law, which is the third crucial development enacted in 2012 and put back to the previous slide. The black line here demonstrates the boundaries of the geographic Marmara region, and three new NUTS 1-level regions highlighted in yellow here, namely the West Marmara region, Istanbul region, and East Marmara region were created following the enactment of Law 4720. And subsequently 5 RDAs were established in the Marmara region. And according to the Metropolitan Municipality Law, new 6 metropolitan municipalities were established in the region, and this part is very important. Villages situated in these provinces were transformed into neighborhood units. And despite the potentiality of multi-scalar integration proposed by the mega infrastructure projects and investments, the new regional administration system remains a fragmented collection of city regions. Given this context, I aim to understand to what extent these policies were corresponding to the urban transformation in the region. And although urban areas make up a tiny share of land at global scale, they are incredibly dense, holding a vast bulk of human activity, and they are moreover in constant flux. Of course, needless to say, they have tremendous economic and environmental impacts. And to measure the transformation of the urban land, Korean dataset generated by the European Environment Agency is a great source. And the dataset includes 44 land covers for the whole Europe region for the years 1990, 2000, 2006, 2012, and now 2018. And the version I used for spatial analysis was obtained from Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. And to ensure consistency with previous studies, I actually continued using the boundaries of the geographic Marmara region based on the NUTS 3-level provincial boundaries. And for this study, I used 3 primary land cover categories. As you see, continuous urban fabric demonstrating the most urbanized areas, discontinued urban fabric showing the areas of sprawl, and continuous rural fabric, as you can tell from the name, showing the rural areas. And in order to evaluate these spatial data sets, I benefited from a graphic user interface developed by Professor Murat, Güvenç, and Savaş Yıldırım that proposes the combined use of multiple correspondence analysis and cluster analysis. Very briefly, I will talk about these two processes in a nutshell, but multiple correspondence analysis is an unsupervised pattern recognition tool derived from correspondence analysis, and it is applicable to more than two categorical variables. And cluster analysis is a non-parametric method that aims to discover the pattern of groupings in a set of data with as few assumptions as possible without about the nature of groupings. And the application of these methods can be traced back to the work of cartographer Jacques Bertin and also sociologist and philosopher Pierre Bourdieu. And this is how I obtain clusters within the database and map them in GIS. And here we are looking at the workflow. And in doing so, I was able to map two or more categories of land-covered data. What I came up with was something quite different than choropleth maps. And these maps help me to illustrate the dynamics of the spatial transformation in the region, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and help me further improve my arguments on the spatial qualities of the urban network within the area. Here, you are looking at the 1990 map. The urban fabric land covers in these maps are illustrated by orange and red colors, and green and purple colors signify the rural fabric. The general distribution of the obtained land cover clusters for 1990 reveals a regional structure comprising 4 differentiated areas. The metropolitan area of Istanbul, already a massive urban agglomeration dominated by land cover clusters with high urban values. And secondly, we are looking at a polynuclear urban formation in the East Marmara region that comprises the urban centers of Gebze, İzmit, Yalova, and Bursa. Thirdly, the Thrace region with a rural network. And lastly, the southwestern Marmara region occupied by clusters with high rural land. Between 1990 and 2000, both urban and rural land increased substantially within the Marmara region. However, the same spatial distribution sort of reproduced itself. So while Thrace and southwestern Marmara continued to be rural, the urban centers of Istanbul and Bursa continued to implode. In 2006, concomitant to the economic recession and governmental restructuring, the urban development process and the change between 2000 and 2006 remained very limited, and the same structure persisted. But the 2012 shows a very different picture, as it illustrates how the aforementioned policy and infrastructural transitions have shaped the regional structure, leading to a more balanced and integrated network of cities. And the impact of these efforts, despite the recession within these years, the whole region expanded, which is something related to the real estate speculation-based policies of JDP. And on the other hand, the genealogy of the rural structure in Thrace and the southwestern Marmara region began to change. As you see here, urbanization splintered towards Thrace and the southwestern Marmara region. And this can also be explained as a hybrid condition in which concentration and sprawl are taking place simultaneously. Though the 4 differentiated areas are still recognizable, significant changes can be observed which crystallize in the interrupted rural structure in Thrace, and the southwestern Marmara region as emergent urban nodes. The analysis of the Marmara region's urban network between 1990 and 2012 reveals the rapid transformation of regional structure, formerly comprised of 4 distinct areas, into a balanced and more integrated network of cities. It is also showing that in 2006, the urban condition may seem to be validating the classification proposed by the European system. However, the dramatic change that took place between 2006 and 2012 reveals that the former structural differences are rapidly changing. The regional urbanization in the Marmara region is fast evolving into a more balanced and integrated network of cities. And under these conditions, it is clear that the European classification became obsolete within a very short time span. And this medium-scale city region-like governmental units generated by the aforementioned policy have failed to capture the degree of convergence on the ground. And likewise, it would be very misleading to justify the metropolitan municipality law on the grounds of a diminishing rural network in the Marmara region, as these areas do not immediately gain urban characteristics. And therefore, the application of this law will generate further vulnerability in rural and in natural areas. And I must say that this attenuation of the rural fabric in the Marmara region might be distinctive within the overall settlement system of Turkey. Or let's put it in a different way, further research is needed into the internal dynamics of the urban-rural structure in Turkey to assist policymakers in effective urban planning and to avoid fait accompli applications. And in developing sustainable urban land use strategies at the regional scale and to enhance the development of a balanced and integrated network of cities in the Marmara region, policymakers should invest in actions that facilitate more intensive engagement and dialogue between RDAs and the metropolitan municipalities. And consequently, this is, I think, one of the most important contributions of this research. The simultaneous effects of the aforementioned opposing forces of sprawl and densification reveal a hybrid urban network that undermines the validity of the polycentric and centralist models that I explained at the beginning, which I think obviously shows that contemporary development patterns of the urban networks demand new concepts and theoretic arguments. And how this data-driven research can be further improved. Corinne 2018 data has been very recently released, and by engaging this study with the recent data set, my colleague Chen Guan and I are working on a cellular automata model to develop further future scenarios of the urban development of the Marmara region, and wish us good luck with that. Thank you.
Efendim, Özlem Altınkaya'ya bu sunuşu için teşekkür ederiz. Şimdi vakit geçirmeden 3. konuşmamıza geçeceğiz. Yani Marmara bölgesinde 90'lardan 2012'ye kadar bütün bu büyük dönüşümler olurken acaba bu bölgenin tam merkezini oluşturan Marmara Denizi'nde neler oluyor? Onu bu konuşmada dinleyeceğiz. Buyurunuz efendim.
Teşekkür ediyorum Murat Hocam. Ben bir önceki konuşmacılara göre...
Thank you very much. My subject will be a bit different compared to the other previous speakers. I'll talk about Marmara Sea the current situation of the ecosystem of Marmara Sea and human resources related pressures on ecosystem and some recommendations for governance to improve the conditions. So I'll briefly talk about the current situation of the ecosystem of Marmara Sea. Then I'll talk about what data we have used and about the current conditions of the Marmara Sea. What are we most curious about? For example, the effect of the waters coming from the Dardanelles Strait, the discharges, and also the other relevant effects, and how can we improve the conditions. The problem. To define the problem, here you see, especially on the right-hand side, there's this color of blue to purple. It shows that there's low levels of oxygen, while in between 1985 and 25, the levels of oxygen was much higher in Marmara Sea, so it's depleting very significantly. So unit-wise, it is falling below 250. Let me show it to you with a short video. So we will see the dynamics of Marmara Sea with this video. Marmara Sea has a two-way current system. Below we have the Mediterranean water, which is more salty, and with the Dardanelles water undertows, it comes from the Mediterranean to the Marmara Sea and flows into the Black Sea. And the Black Sea water, which is less salty, comes with up currents and goes out of the Marmara Sea through the Dardanelles Strait. In between these two layers, there's a mixture. The Black Sea water has nitrate and phosphate and is rich in those because the area received too much precipitation. In Marmara Sea, the agricultural industrial waste is mixed into the Marmara Sea. The input of Marmara Sea is mixed to the up current of Black Sea, and over the current surface waters, these are used by the single cell organisms, and through photosynthesis they are turned into consumption elements which are produced by fish such as bonito, and this chain goes all the way up to the dolphins on the higher ranks of the circle. When these living beings die, they deplete, they fall to the ground, the bottom of the sea, and then carbon dioxide comes out from the deep waters. The oxygen resource of Marmara Sea is coming from the Mediterranean Sea, and during the fragmentation of the organic materials, it's consumed by 80%, and only 20% of it reaches to Marmara Sea. And the area around the Marmara Sea developed industrially much in the past 20 years, and more waste was released into the sea, and on the upper surface we had more elements of organic material accumulating. And due to the intensive amount of living beings, the oxygen generation was restricted. So before the living beings could go deeper, and now due to the limited amount of oxygen production, the living beings moved upwards, and more amounts of organic materials do fall to the bottom of the sea. And this organic material consumes more oxygen in the deep waters. and the oxygen coming through the Dardanelles Strait only very limitedly comes into the Marmara Sea, and this also affects the fish stocks. Marmot project is targeting to ensure ensure there's more oxygen input into the Marmara Sea by looking into the territorial inputs. So I would like to show you some measurements we did before. In Marmara Sea, we had two separate studies. On the upper hand, we see the graph as it was stated in the video. We see the oxygen amount on the surface waters. And below it, we see that the oxygen is being depleted much. So below 50 meters, we see the critical limits. So it's below 80 micromoles, which is indeed below the critical level. So recently, the fall in the oxygen levels in Marmara Sea is very significant. And here you see a data by 2016. On the surface, we only have some oxygen, and in 2019, it's not much different. But still, there's this effect of the Mediterranean Sea through the currents. But still, I can say there's a strong depletion in the levels of oxygen recently in the Marmara Sea. So it's not only about the oxygen levels, it also affects the biodiversity in Marmara Sea, and also we see a decrease in the number of the fish species, and almost all across the Marmara region, this is the picture we see. And other than biodiversity, we see that there's a lot of waste, plastic, trash thrown into the sea, coming into the sea. Especially the bottom habitat is significantly impacted by that, we know. This deterioration in ecosystem, how does it socially affect us? Well, we don't know that yet because this is a subject still to be studied. I mean, the ecosystem changes, the deteriorations in the ecosystem, how does it affect the human beings? We have some forecasts, but of course we need a detailed study showing the social effects of the deterioration in the ecosystem. And we also need to see if the ecosystem is improved, if it improves, how it will contribute to the people. So for our study, we collected all the data about the Marmara Sea, so the inputs coming from the territories, the territorial input, the discharge, the pollution, the waste. And at our institute, for 40 years, we have been making studies about Marmara Sea. We combined all those data. The Ministry of Environment, Istanbul University, Istanbul Waterworks, and many other institutions provided data. And also we try to see different scenarios and how different effects would impact Marmara Sea. So we have a significant amount of marine data, but we have a limited amount of territorial data. There's a lot of ambiguity, there's a significant possibility of error when it comes to territorial data. And that's why we had to look at this situation, approach to it from different perspectives. We tried to collect some forest and river related data, and the total pollution coming from the territories, of course, requires us to conduct continuous measuring. Anyways, we tried to come up with come up with the data showing what comes in and out, and what would different scenarios show us. An important pillar of that study was also to see the load coming from different basins. So we split the Marmara Basin into four regions. We looked into the socio-economic structure there, but also the ecological structure. This is what we tried. And the basin loads and the entry into the Marmara Sea with different loads. For example, the precipitation. And then we had to come up with some reference conditions. I mean, to what levels we want the Marmara Sea to come. So we needed to look back to the healthy conditions of Marmara Sea in the past, so to define those conditions, and we tried to come up with scenarios how we can go back to the earlier versions. The Dardanelles Strait, yes, through it we see Mediterranean waters coming into the Marmara Sea, but in how much of a period of time we can render the water coming in healthier again. We ran some tests on the waters coming from the Dardanelles Strait, and also we know that the Mediterranean waters are mixed into the Black Sea region, but that's not always the case, because the water coming in from the Mediterranean Sea can be mixed up with the bottom sea waters, and then without making their way to the Black Sea, they can go all the way back to the strait and down to the Aegean Sea. And also, of course, there are some inputs and outputs. Not everything comes into Marmara Sea and stay there, but they also leave from the straits, or also from the Bosporus Strait. Here you can see below 25 meters, the levels of oxygen is always around 80s, and it's deteriorating. So the situation in our day should not continue. Looking at different scenarios, we see the Mediterranean water really has a big impact, especially in the Dardanelles Strait scenario. So the oxygen levels in the deep waters can go below, even from 50 to 26, while our target is to increase it over 80%. And the pollution coming from Black Sea has a big impact. So other than the territorial input, we see that some marine-related pollution is coming in to the Marmara Sea from the Black Sea. So some scientists used to say there's no way to fix that. But when we looked into that, yes, there's a significant amount of load coming from the Black Sea. But even if we don't have any extra load input coming from the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea will still not be healthy. So that's why the territorial input has a big impact. The discharges to the Bosporus Straits have a very big impact, because with the surface waters it is carried. So the territorial input should be reduced by 40%, that pollution, that waste, because it constitutes the most significant portion of that pollution. We have to be careful about certain locations of discharges into the sea, and we need to have more treatment facilities and activities. But still, we came up with, we saw that there were some solutions to make Marmara Sea healthier in the next 5-6 years. First, we have to start with the discharging methodologies, changing and optimizing those discharging mechanisms. And in this graph, for example, we see that the discharges into the Bosporus if we can improve the conditions by 75% and if we can reduce the territorial input by 35% in 5-6 years, the oxygen levels will go over the limits of oxygen, which is like around 80% currently, as I said before. So I'm just summarizing the outcomes of the study, but I also would like to say what we should do. We have a certain basin preservation action plans. Also, we have some action plans about discharges into the sea. We, at the same time, have some master plans, some action plans by the Ministry of Environment. So if we just apply and practice the current plans, would it help? We asked. And we saw that the improvement suggestions in the current plans will even be enough. It's only needed that we fulfill those needs and we put them into implementations. We so already have some action plans. For example, the reduction of the territorial input or the load by 40% effectively is in many of those plans. So if we do those, we will see a rapid improvement in Marmara Sea, especially in the south regions of the Marmara Sea. Dispersed loads are very common, and certain loads in the south, in the north, and in the west of the sea should be reduced. So 65% of the nitrate, for example, in South Marmara is dispersed loads. Even the natural vegetation would reduce that pollution. In North Marmara, 84% of the primary waters, primary wastewater, is discharged into the sea without treatment. And if we can treat a certain significant amount of it, then it will be reducing that load, that negative load on the sea very significantly. And in the South Marmara also, we don't have that much natural habitat left. But for example, if we have natural vegetation around the streams running into the sea, it will even have an effect. So the Dardanelles basin has less negative impact, but the oxygenated clean water comes in through that strait, and if we have bad results in the other parts of the sea, then the effectiveness of those clean waters will die out. There's also the Izmit Bay. We have to make sure that there's no input, territorial input and point sources coming into the sea. This was all I had to say. Thank you very much. We would like to thank to Barış, Salihoğlu a lot. This is an important presentation because by the end of 1960s, there was this international DAMOC project conducted to talk about Istanbul's infrastructure, and the main thing about that project was about the deep discharging of the waste into Marmara, and it coming up to the surface in Marmara and going to the Black Sea, ventilated and disposed, but we then see that it did not work out. So the solutions of one period's problems will be the problems of another period in time. And about data, I'll have two more things to say and leave the floor to the audience. The data is the raw material of the information age. So the information age works with data, and the raw materials maybe are depleted as used, but data is accumulated more and more as we use it. So the social, economic, ecosystematic data, when these are all combined, we will probably see some other new dimensions, and that will help us to understand the environmental issues much better and come up with some policies. And in the time we are now, the data goes beyond national levels. It should be collected internationally, supranationally, because we have the global warming issues, climate change issues, and the resolution levels of that data should go much beyond than what we are used to. And the data itself is not something neutral. It lays the grounds for criticism. So a data analysis which excludes criticism would be dry, and how to put it, won't open horizons, I believe. So I would like to finalize my words and now leave the floor to our audience. If there's anyone who would like to make a contribution, please go ahead.
Bir sorumuz var galiba. Herhalde oraya mikrofon götürmemiz gerekiyor.
Merhaba, benim sorum Barış.
My question is to Barış, especially with regard to Kanal Istanbul. I have a project. If Kanal Istanbul project is materialized, it has a depth of 25 meters, and Marmara Sea is at a lower position than the Black Sea. What do you think will be the impact of such a project on Marmara Sea with regard to the ecosystem? Thank you. Well, I think it's a great question. I didn't have the opportunity to talk about all the details. However, in the upcoming phase of the study, Marmara will be considered with its three aspects, and the impact of Kanal Istanbul will be tested accordingly. And we will be able to measure its impact. Once Kanal Istanbul is inaugurated, the Black Sea water will mingle with the Marmara Sea. And it is clear that Black Sea water is dirty. Of course, it won't have an impact, just like the impact of the Bosphorus, because it's a tighter channel. However, it is clear that it will create a negative impact. In order to see the level, we are planning to conduct a couple of studies in the upcoming periods. There is this Ergene Basin, and probably the load of this basin will come to Marmara as well. And first and foremost, we have to conduct a study and see the figures in front of us. We have not done it yet. Thank you. Well, there are a couple of questions that I have received. I would like to share them with you. So the first question was to Barış, and it was conveyed. The second question is to Özge. The question is as follows. You say that database policies are important. However, it is clear that the administrative authorities are unwilling to share their data. So what can we do to make them more willing to share their data? So I think we are trying to struggle with that. The public authorities do have a reflex in the sense that some data should be kept by them. It might not make much of a sense to acquire the data from them or even to demand the data, because the way that the data is kept is not, might not be that good. So if the data is not kept in a good way, then it doesn't make much of a sense to share the data. So we can't say that they hide the data from us. However, we should ask ourselves what we could do. I think the solution, multi-shareholders would be a great solution to that. If we do have a certain goal in our mind, then we won't get negative results all the time. I don't know as to whether a student or an institution asked this question, but I have very much detailed experience. If you would like to get more information, please do consult me. Okay. Istanbul 95 website. There's a question around it. I don't know as to whether, what will be the comments of Özge. But when you have a look at this map, it looks like there is a social difference between the south and north of E5. This differentiation goes on, and when you reach Pendik or Tuzla, it gets blurred, they say. So what might be the reason of it? They are your maps. Maybe you could dwell on it. Well, there might be quite a lot of reasons behind it, but one reason might be as follows. Let's think it that way. Pendik, Tuzla, when you get to Pendik, Tuzla, the seashore gets narrow. From Gebze to İzmit, the seashore gets really limited. It gets narrowed down, that's why there's no differentiation. Özlem, there's one question to Özlem. I don't know as to whether you'll be able to communicate with her again or not. The map that you have made and the project that you have carried out is very much valuable, people say. However, this study, which goes beyond the borders of the provinces, is not that easy to follow. And it lies at the heart of our research, because data collection, and we need to collect data and determine a new unit. So what about Özlem? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Hello everyone from Groningen, Netherlands. I missed Murat, the Professor Murat, to tell you the truth. Well, this is a very good question and a very important point. It touches upon a very good point. But at that point, maybe the decision makers should change their own perspectives. What I have tried to communicate in my presentation was like that, because what is happening is that the urbanization process does not listen to the borders. There are different concepts, new methods of communication and dialogue, and we have to look for these. I hope I was able to answer your question. Thank you. I guess it fits the concept of the meeting, because new concepts, new data collection should be in place. Okay. Upon this conclusion, I'd like to close this session. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your efforts. Thank you.